because of the threats which were coming from one Patrick Chinamasa from Zimbabwe and Rutendo over the threats that they managed to kill the former late president Patrick Manawasa. I was thinking it was a lie, so I went to the social media to try and check if these people truly said they killed President Manawasa and now they are going for President Hakainde Hichilema. And for sure, I found that on the social media.
Now, for those of you that have been following the relationship between Zambia and Zimbabwe, they actually undertook protests against me and a senior government official of ZANU-PF on the pretext that we killed a former president of Zambia and intend to kill a sitting president in Zambia. That is absolutely ludicrous. And the fact that a minister, a Zambian minister in the Copper Belt, is actually making such an announcement, receiving a petition from ruling party protesters, actually makes it absolutely absurd. It's crazy for the Zambians to say this, particularly when you understand the tweet that I wrote. In my tweet, which I have here, I'm basically saying that Levi Mwanawasa was orchestrating an invasion of Zimbabwe, and I'm putting context to this, in 2008 after the elections of Zimbabwe. And now Hakainde Hichilema is trying to use a SADC report written by a former vice president who was part and parcel of Levi Mwanawasa to springboard Americans to attack Zimbabwe. And I basically said, he will see that you don't mess with Africa. Now, let me give you context, and you need to follow what I'm talking about for you to fully understand this. My tweet comes on the back of an account written Patrick Chinamasa. We don't know if that account really belongs to Patrick Chinamasa, but this account went on to give a narrative of what happened in 2008 after Zimbabwe's presidential and parliamentary elections. The opposition had won narrowly a majority in parliament after utilizing sanctions for 8 years to make the Zimbabwean people suffer, to deprive them of water, healthcare, education, food, and to actually kill some of them who died because of a lack of healthcare, a lack of cholera medication, and to displace Zimbabweans who were then forced by the pain of sanctions to vote for the opposition. So they gave them a slight majority in parliament. But in the presidential elections, Morgan Tsvangirai failed to get the 50+1, so we had to have a runoff election. While all this was happening, the CIA and the MI6 in the background were busy asking the opposition of Zimbabwe to attack government of Zimbabwe, or at least let's call them the ZANU-PF members, so that there would be violence in Zimbabwe. We have got incidents where daughters of soldiers in Zimbabwe were raped by leaders of the opposition, not only in this election, but even the previous election. To the extent that ZANU-PF began to feel like they were being bullied and began to retaliate. A lot of ZANU-PF members had also realized that we are being made to suffer by this opposition that has called for weapons of economic warfare to deprive us of food, education, healthcare, and to kill us and to separate our families. So they began to fight. It became a fight of supporters. But it created an environment of violence during these elections. And it is because of that when we were supposed to have the runoff election between Morgan Tsvangirai and Robert Mugabe, Morgan Tsvangirai pulled out and said, there's too much violence, I can't participate. All a part of the plan of the CIA and other agencies of the West to remove ZANU-PF. When that happened, Robert Mugabe won. After winning, the British government immediately approached the Zambian government and said, listen, we want to invade Zimbabwe to remove this ZANU-PF. And this is in a context of lies from the Western media, the South African media, creating the impression that ZANU-PF is this demonic party that must be removed to free the Zimbabwean people. But this wasn't the first time, if you remember. Thabo Mbeki said that in 2002, after Robert Mugabe won the presidential elections, under the same sanctions that were instituted in 2000 and in 1999 actually, to remove him from power. ZANU-PF in 2000 had won parliamentary elections and had a majority in parliament, and then he went on to win the presidential elections, disappointing the West, whose sanctions failed to remove them. So they approached Thabo Mbeki and said, can we invade Zimbabwe? Thabo Mbeki said no. So this time in 2008, the next elections, they didn't go to Thabo Mbeki, they went to the Zambians. And Levi Mwanawasa, whose deputy was Nevas Mumba, who was then sent to Zimbabwe to give the report that was given by SADC. I'll come back to that. Levi Mwanawasa said, yes, you can invade Zimbabwe from Zambia. So he held a SADC meeting in which Zimbabwe was invited. And they were told that the British are going to come to Zambia, they're going to put their troops, we're going to allow them, and they're going to remove you. Emmerson Mnangagwa, the current president, according to this article, even pleaded with Mwanawasa that he should not allow the British to invade. But Mwanawasa said he was committed to doing that. He had then got to go to the AU to ask for permission and to tell them about the plan. So there was going to be an AU meeting in Cairo where he was going to go give his story and going to allow the British government to invade. Before he could go to Cairo, he died of a heart attack. Now, as Africans, we believe in divine intervention and spirituality. So many of us believe that this was God refusing for the British to invade an African country, to destroy it like what had happened to Libya. Because the moment Levi died, the issue died with him. However, the Zimbabwean people were still forced to have a government of national unity, or a coalition government between the opposition that had brought itself into power through sanctions and the government of Zimbabwe. Now we fast forward to the elections that we had now. Nevas Mumba was the deputy president of Levi Mwanawasa, who wanted to attack Zimbabwe. He is then sent by the new Zambian president, Hakainde Hichilema, to come and write a report for SADC. And the intention of the report is it must be negative so that ZANU-PF looks like it stole elections again, so that the US soldiers and the US army that's in Zambia can come and remove the Zimbabwean government. But the problem is here. Nevas Mumba was a member of the government of Levi Mwanawasa that wanted to remove the current ZANU-PF government. He should have disclosed that as a conflict of interest. He did not. His president, Hakainde Hichilema, is financing the opposition in Zimbabwe. It should have been disclosed according to the rules of the SADC Observer Mission Code. He did not. Nevas Mumba has a criminal record. It was supposed to be disclosed, then he wouldn't have been a member of the SADC Observer Mission, but he did not disclose that. And finally, there's the issue of sanctions and the issue of bias. All these are factors. So why are the Zambian government angry at me? They're not angry at me about my statement that I showed you on Twitter. They're angry because last week when I did a critique of the report, I brought it out that the Zambian government has a US base on its soil that is to be used to attack Southern African countries and obviously to attack Zimbabwe. The intention of that base is to ensure that right now there is a disputed election. They want the opposition of Zimbabwe to go on the streets to protest wildly and violently. And once the police are deployed to stop these protests, they'll say that the Zimbabwean government is killing the Zimbabwean people, and therefore the Americans must intervene to assist the Zimbabwean people and free them from this demon called ZANU-PF, as portrayed in the South African media, as portrayed in the Western media. The Zambians are angry that I brought these facts out, because Nevas Mumba then came and said, no, we don't have a base, we've got an AFRICOM office, but everybody that's been flying into Zambia has seen all the aircraft and weapons of the US government that are at the Zambian airport. There are weapons of the American government in Zambia right now because they already have a base, and that base is ready to deploy against Zimbabwe. And after Zimbabwe, next year they will deploy against South Africa and the ANC if the ANC wins and doesn't lose elections next year. They don't like the fact that I brought these facts out. How do we know this? Right now, yesterday, the American government had to admit through AFRICOM that it is giving the Zambian government helicopters, 4 of them. And they had to say that those helicopters are for peacekeeping missions. What they can't say is that they had already deployed weapons in their base in Zambia to attack Southern Africa.
The United States government will be providing 4 new high-performance Bell helicopters to the Zambian Defense Force. These helicopters will enable Zambia to continue to support UN peacekeeping